So the name of this is the Sacrificial Generation, but I almost changed the name. I mean, I spent a good deal of my morning just discussing name with myself. And you guys know, for some reason, I spend more thought on names than maybe I should. But for me, they're placeholders. They say something, and years from now, I reference back to a name. And so I want it to match what is going on. And so I almost changed it to the first sufferers, because that's why I'm slipping it at the beginning. So it's sort of like we get credit for two different names on this one. This is I decided officially it's going to be the Sacrificial Generation, and mainly because I feel like that says it more clearly what I'm trying to get across. Whereas if I just say first sufferers, some of you are like, oh, I know where he's going with this. You follow me? And so since that's a term we've used quite often in the Ellerslie world, I want to sort of bring up an idea and sort of expand it a little. To give you context for this, this is a continuation of the series that I'm going through in the spiritual biography of a nation, as I'm going through the formation of what we know as the United States of America, but not so that I can teach history, but so that I can teach how God works in the construction of strength. And there's so many lessons that we've gone through so far in the first 13 that have been transformative. I mean, extremely powerful. And this is equally so. I'm right at the time of 1620, heading in, crescendoing into the darkest hour, if you want to say it. The darkest hour in World War II is May of 1940. This is like the darkest hour of American history, if you want to say it that way, that most of us know about. And that's December of 1940, December of 1620, January of 1621, February of 1621, and March of 1621. And you'll understand why. And it'll all rekindle as I go through. It's like, oh, wow, that is a really intense stretch. Out of it is going to come what we know as the strength of our country, out of this little pocket of time. And it is a proving, it is a crucible. And it's a crucible that I almost feel like is setting in front of us right now. And we could stare at it through plate glass window and go, yeah, boy, I'm glad that's someone else that's walked through that. And I almost feel like there's a door to this crucible, guys, that is open to us to say, I am looking for a few men and women from this generation that would be willing to do the same, to set a pattern in place to shift the course of history. So technically this isn't a Ronald Reagan quote, but Ronald Reagan said it, and he's one of the guys that many people think said it. Barack Obama also said it, so I'm giving credit to Ronald Reagan. Technically, I think it goes back to a Jewish rabbi from way back. It's a sketchy history. No, I don't think anyone knows. It's a great quote, and everyone could say it, no matter what their creed is. That's why I'm sort of trying to grab it for a very certain purpose. But if not us, who? If not now, when? There is a pressing that I think many of us feel today, and I'm not sure because I've only lived inside of my body. I've said that many times as a leader. It's like I'm not exactly sure what other people are feeling. I just have hunches. But that there is a need to do something at a greater, more heightened level to respond to the encroaching darkness. That darkness is going to have its way and it's going to continue to increase unless something happens. And if you were to say, Eric, what do you mean by something happens? I don't know what I mean by something happens. I just know something needs to happen. And I also know that throughout history, when the enemy comes in like a flood, God raises up a standard against it, or something happens. And that's what I want to make sure we don't miss. I don't want us to miss it because we are so self-focused, that we are so comfortable in our American traditions. I don't want to miss God doing something. I want to jump aboard whatever train that is and say, God, I want a ticket on that. And yet, when we are having that discussion with God, we need to recognize that what we are asking to get a ticket on will likely lead to our death. When God is doing something in response to the powers of darkness, it looks sort of like AD 33, to use a generalized date, the cross. That's what it looks like. It looks like something being raised up to literally absorb something, to stand in a gap. And it usually doesn't lead to the continued life of the gap filler. So it is a decision to lay down your life. And I mean this. I'm not just talking grand and epic and romantic concepts, even though I do like those. I'm actually talking about a very, very real decision-making process that I'm engaged in right now. Trying to decide. We've had many moments in Ellerslie over the past, whatever it's been, 5-6 months. I don't know how long COVID's been lingering. And the effects of it have been stirring us as a body. But at what point do I take a step beyond what would be, you can hide under radar with what you do, or you could step up and stick your head out of a foxhole. And who in their right mind would ever do that? And so that's part of the decision-making process for me. There's many moments where Leslie and I will say, are we supposed to do something right now? And our human response is no. No. We don't need any more drama in our life, because we do have plenty of it, and we don't need more. And I agree with that. On paper, it's a truthful statement. But sometimes God positions you as an Esther to actually stand up and to fill the gap. And Esther is knowing when she is being asked by Mordecai to do that, she recognizes that it will likely lead to her death. She doesn't know the end of the book of Esther. She doesn't see the outcome. She knows the need. And she recognizes that she was placed in that position for such a time as this. So how do I not know that I have been positioned for such a time as this? Well, but God, I want to live a long life. I have dreams. I have desires, as everyone does. But when you start catching God's dreams and desires, it could be that, Eric, I want you here right now, and I've positioned you right here to say this at this exact hour. And this will create a domino effect, which will change the direction of history. Esther is going to be used to rise up and change the direction of history. David, the shepherd boy, is going to rise up and make a decision that will change the course of history. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. And we see, and many of you have heard me reference this before, but you have Eve, who is going to eat of the fruit. And she is going to disobey God. And then all we know, Adam is just suddenly just going to eat the fruit too. And she gave it to her husband, and he did eat. It's like, what? Come on, buddy, at least show some backbone. You see, Adam was supposed to respond differently. And this is where the term the sacrificial generation comes from, is there is meant to be something that stops the flow of evil. And in this situation, the priest of Eden, Adam, was the one that was supposed to rise up and say, Eve, we cannot eat of that fruit. The day in which we eat of that fruit, we will surely die. She's like, I don't feel dead. As her eyes, I always say, one eye's going this way, one eye's going this way. I don't feel dead. In other words, she's lost the very presence of God. She has exited life. Even though she has mortal life, she has lost spiritual life. And so Adam eats. Come on, Adam. This is the very moment that we need Adam. And so imagine if Adam's like, Eve, and Eve is like, Adam, and they're separating apart, and Adam's like, what do I do? And he runs into God. And God says, Adam, what's going on? God, Eve, she ate of the fruit. I know. She must die. But God, is there any other way? You can die for her. See, death is required. And in this situation, it's pretty obvious who should lay down the life. You see, Adam, if he had risen up and proved the man, the priest, would have said, take me instead. Instead, he got swallowed up in the darkness along with Eve. We lost our advocate. We lost our man. We lost our priest in the situation. So God's like, whoa, we need a priest who can stand on behalf of the bride. And so he himself is going to become that. He is going to don human skin. He is going to come to this earth and be groomed as the priest who can actually stand in the place, who can rise up and be the sacrificial generation so that others can live. If not us, who? If not now, when? So you guys know I've been studying a lot of World War II right now, and that's what the Daily Thunders are always dealing with. Now, there's an idea in World War II that I tried to find the quote that I came across. It was like this last week. You ever had that? But I read too many things. And so I could not land it. And so I created my own quote. Okay, it's a good quote. Okay, guys, it's not as good as taking a quote from someone who actually, was making the decisions in 1939 of how to respond. But this is the logic. The logic of what many are going to consider the greatest generation ever. And what could we call this generation? A sacrificial generation. Listen to this logic. If a generation must sacrifice to gain liberty and to put down evil, if it's necessary that a generation sacrifice in order to gain liberty and put down evil, why should we set that upon our children's shoulders? Why shouldn't we carry that burden upon our own shoulders and happily give up our lives that our children might have a God-fearing world to live in? That's a very interesting flow of logic. You see, if we knew that there was a requirement that someone was going to have to lay down their life, it's very easy for us to pass that on to our generation, the next generation, unless you're a good parent. And if you're a good parent and you realize that's my own kids that I'm passing that on to, that creates an inner struggle of what you do. And you're going to see a whole generation of men. The reason they are going to so aggressively go after Hitler and be willing to die, and I'm not saying it was easy for all of them, but the reason they're willing to do this is they recognize that if they don't stop this now, their children are going to be under it. And so they are willing to lay down their lives. It's a sacrificial generation, okay? It's the very concept that I'm trying to bring up today. So the pattern of the first sufferer. If someone must suffer, choose me. Now, everything about this is very noble sounding. Okay, there is something right about it. That if someone came into this room and said, hey, I'm going to hurt someone, well, then it's sort of like, who's he going to hurt? Technically, as the leader, I should be ready to say, take me. And we all know that there's something noble about that. However, I don't want to mess with the fact that I may paralyze in that moment and Steve Rosen rises up and says, take me. It's like, I don't want Steve to be able to do that. I want to be quick in being ready to suffer. Now, there's nothing in us in this culture. I was talking with a man yesterday, and one of the statements he made was, if you don't teach work ethic young, it's very difficult to teach it in the teens. And, well, how about this? If you don't teach how to suffer well when you're young, it becomes increasingly more and more difficult for the old dog to teach him new tricks. We are in many ways that old dog. I don't know if you guys could acknowledge that, but we haven't grown up suffering. We haven't grown up accepting difficulty and embracing it with a smile. And as a result, we become vulnerable to entering into this season where God wants to raise up a standard against something, and yet we may shrink back instead of go forward. This is the arena that I want God to touch us in and to prepare us in. I don't mind being a supernatural generation, a generation that supernaturally overcomes what we would consider the obstacle of non-practice. This is why during World War II, when I was naming my World War II series, I named it 1940. And the reason I named it 1940 is because it so startled me to see what happened from 1939 to 1940 in Great Britain. These guys were more pathetic than we are now in 1939. Okay, that's saying a lot. And in 1940, they're going to be considered the greatest generation ever. They're going to awaken from their stupor, and then they're going to go and lay down their lives. And I mean, when you study Great Britain in 1940, it is so inspiring because you have families that are gathering together basically saying, it's very likely that Hitler is going to invade. Here's how we're going to respond. Here, we are going to give up our life because if we don't lay down our life, then this island will always be ruled by an evil. And so even if we have to die, I mean, this is the way they're talking. This is the self-centered. I mean, this is the exact opposite in 1939, and something is going to shift, which inspires me. It gives me that sense of hope to say, you know what? Even though I'm looking around at the church right now, which is creating every excuse that it can come up with of why we should just be, passively allowing the government to tell us what to do and how we are to function, and that we are no longer allowed to do this or this or this. It's like Christianity has never taken its cues from the world. We have always been against the grain. The fact that we have had rights in this country is a rare thing in Christian history. Most Christians throughout history have never had one right to go out and share the gospel with someone. We do not do what we do because we have governmental rights. We do what we do because we have a commission from the Most High God, knowing full well that it will cost us our life if we're really going to follow through and be obedient to that. We need to wake up from our stupor and recognize that we are in the midst of a battle, and that Hitler regime is going to rule our world unless a generation rises up and says, take us. So this is the stirring that's in me. This is what you're going to see. I'm going to bring up in American history today. In 1620, in December of 1620, you're going to see the generation that says, take me. And they're literally going to be the foundation of the government that we understand, the history of America that we cherish, even though right now if I were to take a snapshot of America, many of us would have a tough time cherishing it as a wonderful country. We have wonderful roots. We have a wonderful framework, and it has so much potential as long as godliness is maintained. A fear of God is kept. If you lose the fear of God in the midst of this governmental system, it's lost. It's no different than any nation previous that is ruled by the flesh and self-seeking individuals. We've had something very, very precious in this country. I do believe it is worth standing up for. And so as a result, we're going to feel that tension as we go through this. But my desire isn't to save America. My desire is to see the church rise up and stand on behalf of the truth of Jesus Christ. I want to see a revival of the nations. I want to see an awakening that stirs. I want to shove this back in the enemy's face and let him rue the day he ever disturbed the church of Jesus Christ from its slumber. Because right now, there's a stirring, and many of you have felt it. It's sort of like, God, are you asking more of me? And I have talked with many, many men around the country, around the world. God, are you asking more of me? Of course, we know the answer to that question. God, are you asking more of me? Is that a rhetorical question? Of course he is. God desires more, but we have justified serving him up to this point because it's so radical next to the rest of the world around us. But God wants to take us into the real thing. The sort of thing that when it's fed to lions, sings a song, shouts for victory. Okay, whatever that is, that's what we're after. So the first sufferer. This is a concept that I've used as far as in my own mind, my own understanding for quite a long time to describe manhood. Because Jesus is going to be the one that says, take me. He's going to come to this earth, and it's like, okay, there's rightful judgment on the head of this bride, and Jesus is going to say, take me instead. I mean, that's the gospel in a nutshell. He suffered for us. And so we become these miniatures, this miniature representation of this same love, this same willingness to lay down our life that others may find life. We are not life givers the way that Jesus is. He's a capital L life giver. But we are lowercase l life givers. That there's a real movement of grace when we step into that same role and allow the Spirit of God to work in us to say, take me instead. So the inner wrestlings of Eric Ludy, that's on the screen right now. It says, the test at Jason's Deli. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard this story because it's not a real thing that happened. It's in my imagination. I don't know how many of you guys have ever lived out in your imagination what you would do. This is like classic Eric. So I will put myself in scenarios and then ask myself, so Eric, what are you going to do right now? And it's weird because even in my imagination, I have to be honest with myself. I'm just one of those guys that's like, yeah, God, I'm not sure what I'm going to do right now. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I feel really weak. I feel very weak-kneed because I've seen myself in certain situations cower and pull back. And I don't like that. I do not esteem cowardice at all, but I know my propensity to be a coward. And there is a part of Eric that I feel is fragile and weak in a time of testing, and that I want God to overwrite that with a new pattern of living, a new way of functioning, so that when I hit those moments of trial, it is an instinct to rise up and be Christ in that situation. It's not an instinct to pull back and self-preserve. Natural man pulls back and self-preserves. Spiritual man expends. I want to be a spiritual man. I want to be a man built by the kingdom of heaven and heaven's lumber, not by the earthly, fragile plastic stuff. I want the real thing. And I know many of you in here resonate deeply with that. So here's my imagination. I'm in Jason's Deli. The reason it was Jason's Deli is Leslie and I were on some getaway, and we were in a hotel and right across the street with a Jason's Deli, and we would walk up and down this one street and there was a Jason's Deli both ways, right? So I had something going on where I was chewing on it in my mind. So I could even tell you the Jason's Deli that it was in. It was a very specific one in Broomfield, right? And so I'm walking, I go into Jason's Deli and I'm eating my sandwich. And suddenly these bad guys come in, like these terrorists come in, and they have like machine guns, and they start screaming at the top of their lungs, everyone, everyone! And they start shooting into the ceiling. You have pieces of ceiling that are falling. It's one of those crazy situations that throws your equilibrium off, and it causes you to panic. So everyone is like diving onto the floor and hiding under tables, right? And I feel the instinct to do the same. However, I really like the mental picture of Eric continuing to eat his sandwich. I really like that, okay? If this is a movie scene, I want to be the guy that is still eating my sandwich, sort of like, come on, guys, grow up, right? And then they grab someone from the crowd, and it's a lady. And I don't know what she looks like, but it's a lady, and she's grabbed by the bad guy, and he puts a gun to her head. And he says, get him on the phone. She's going to die. And so there's some kind of negotiations going on. They're asking for a lot of money, and if they don't get something that they want, then this lady's going to die. Okay, so here I am. I mean, I was just minding my own business. But the question that I ask myself is, if something surprises my life, something that I wasn't prepared for, who's ready for this, right? But I want to be ready for this. Now, I may have jumped down on the floor. Okay, instinct is instinct, right? And so I may be under the table and have some pieces of ceiling falling on me, but my desire is that I would come to my senses as quickly as possible and recognize who I am and what I represent. I hope that I'm still eating my sandwich, sitting there acting like everything's normal, and look over and I see what is taking place. And so here's my mental picture. This is what I desire, that I would move forward and walk towards the bad guy and put my hand up in the air and say, take me instead. This is like a deep working in my soul to say, God, build me for this moment. Take me instead. Now, to do that, you have to be crazy, or you have to be a Christian. You see, a Christian is an expendable. A Christian is built to give. A Christian is given life so that it can give it. I know exactly what's happening with my future. I know that to live is Christ, but to die is gain. I do not fear death. The reason Eric Ludy hesitates, there's so many layers to that. There is the fear of pain, the fear of difficulty, the fear of awkwardness, but then there's also the fear of leaving my family, leaving them without an advocate, leaving them without a father and a husband. And so there's these natural realm hesitations. But I want to be the sort of guy that has a priority list that says, God, if you stick me in that position, Leslie and my kids know exactly how I'm going to respond. And they know that I need to respond as Jesus would respond. Who wants to be the settler? Now, I've gone through over the past few weeks the decision-making process of the Leidenites or the Separatists, or we know as the Pilgrims once they came over here. their decision-making process is very extreme. They're in an extreme situation, and to weigh where they're going to go, even in deciding to go north in the northern part to join the Virginia charter in Jamestown, was a decision that was odd, if you want to say it that way, but they felt led of God to do this because they could have gone to South America where the fruit just sort of falls from the tree and there's gold everywhere, supposedly. That was the legend that Sir Walter Raleigh had passed on. And instead, they are going to deliberately choose a harder way. They're going to choose Virginia, and they're going to actually end up in New England, as many of us know. And however, the statistics of coming over, 50% of those that came over to the Jamestown colony would die within the first year. 85%, it's actually, this statistic is 80 to 90%, we'll just say 85%, would die within, I don't know what it was, 2 years? So it's like, if you're coming over, you're basically laying down your life. For the pilgrims, they're not coming over to get gold. They're not coming over to have an easier life. They're coming over being led by God, very specifically. I've gone through that. If you want to understand that, you just need to listen to my previous 2 sessions. However, they're making a choice that literally means the loss of their life, likely. But they are going to establish a settlement where the rest of those that are being booted out of England, because the Puritans and the Pilgrims, or the separatists, are all being removed from England in 1618. It's called the Edict of 1618. If you're not part of the Church of England, if you're not subservient to this, if you won't bow your knee to this, you're out of the whole country. Their homeland, they're literally removed from. Could you imagine we were just booted out of America with no place to go? That's a weird situation. This little ragtag group is going to set a pattern. They're going to go before, lay down their life, and create a place where others can come and find refuge. It's actually going to form our nation. Technically, our nation is going to be built out of James I's decision to kick the spiritual strength out of England, and it looks for a home. Where does it come? It comes to America. It's like, thank you, James I. That really worked out to our benefit. And yet, who's going to go before and lay down their life to create the environment where these people can come and survive? It's going to be this group. So if you just saw in front of you, it's like, okay, guys, we need a few people that are willing to go through this massively difficult adventure, which I've been going through the last couple weeks, and 85% of you will not make it out alive. What's interesting is if you take the first 12 apostles, and you're going to actually get an almost identical statistic. You could say 100%, but technically it's going to be like 91%. 11 out of 12 are going to die. John, the apostle, is going to be thrown into a vat of boiling oil and pulled out unscathed and exiled to Patmos. So it's arguable to even not include that and make it 100%. But this is like, who's following me? Who's in? Who wants to lay the foundation for the Church of Jesus Christ? Any takers? We all desire to be one that Jesus would choose. Or do we? You see, this is the most illustrious position in history, is to be one who would be asked to be a foundation stone for those to come and build upon. Who wouldn't want this? Every one of us esteems it, but then when it gets down to brass tacks and God looks for a raise of hands who's ready to go, not many people raise their hand. I want to be one, and I know you guys understand what I mean because I know you do too. We want to be ones that actually shoot our hand up without hesitation. 85% of those that go will likely die before the next group of pilgrims arrive. Whew. Stephen was stoned, Philip was crucified, Matthew was slain with the sword, James, the brother of Jesus, was stoned in club, Matthias was stoned and beheaded, Mark was dragged to pieces, Jude was crucified, Bartholomew was cruelly beaten and then crucified, Thomas was thrust through with a spear, Luke was hung, Simon Peter was crucified, and John was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil and removed unscathed and exiled to Patmos. So what I did, and I've done this before in Ellerslie semesters, I don't know if I've ever done it on a Sunday, is I talk about a clipboard, where an angel comes in and sets up a clipboard and goes, guys, I decided to stop here at Ellerslie first because I know a lot of you have been praying that you would be used by God mightily in your generation. So I'm needing a few men and women who are willing to sign up on the clipboard. I need 12 of you who would be willing to be a foundation, to be a sacrificial generation. so that we can get this thing known as the church up and going again, strong. And so we have a few job descriptions we're looking for. And so you'll notice that on the clipboard, I have a space where you can put in your name. And so I'm going to leave the clipboard behind, and I'll come back and collect it in about 20 minutes. And if you guys are unwilling to sign up your names, I'll find them somewhere else. Who in the right mind would ever allow that angel to leave without your name on the clipboard? I mean, if you think about what matters in all of eternity, and you had the privilege of being one of David's mighties, if you will. You have the privilege of being one of the few who was asked by God, who was put in a position because God trusted you. God said, I would like to give you this job. And you say, no, go and look elsewhere. God will look elsewhere. I always call that the Deborah solution. It's like, hey guys, where are the men? Well, the men don't do it. Deborah will be raised up. You don't want, if you're supposed to be Barak, who's supposed to rise up and be the judge, do it. This is our privilege. But we all feel the tension because when rubber meets the road and Christianity really becomes real, and these are real stories unfolding in our very lives, you notice that we tend to pull back. We tend to come up with justifications. So who will be stoned? Who will be crucified? Who will be slain with the sword? Who will be stoned and clubbed? Who will be stoned and beheaded? Who will be dragged to pieces? Who will be crucified? Who will be cruelly beaten and then crucified? Who will be thrust through with a spear? Who will be hung? Who will be crucified? And who will be thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil? Now, some of you are like, well, I thought I was supposed to be removed unscathed. Well, there's no guarantee. That's not on the clipboard. We don't see that. All we know is we have a job description. It's going to look different in our generation, I know. However, if this really was a clipboard, right now and this morning, how are you responding to it? That's what I'm trying to stir. I want us to ready ourselves in our spiritual man for a yes. And if you find that there is an impediment between you and that yes, I want you to allow God to deal with that impediment. Whatever removes that and dissolves it and gets it out of the way so that you are in a position to be used by the Holy Spirit for such a time as this, I say, let's do that. The invite. So if you guys have ever heard of the Cambridge 7, Hudson Taylor comes back to England, gives a rip-roaring invitation to the young people of his generation in England to come and join him in his mission over in China. C.T. Studd and a whole bunch of other guys, well, it's 6 other men, are going to rise up as one man, and they're going to be like, we're in. It's an incredible troop of men, and they're going to go over to China. And I still remember the story where Hudson Taylor has a situation. It's a certain province in China that he needs, I don't know if it was 2 guys to go to, and it's very likely going to lead to their death. So you could just imagine even for Hudson Taylor to put it before the Cambridge 7. It's like, guys, I need 2 of you who would be willing to go. Now, what's always amazed me about this story is that all 7 of them enthusiastically, immediately shoot up their hand and say, let me be the one. Don't look at him. I want to be the one. And I find myself, even when I read the story, doing this, where someone raises their hand, and once I see 2 guys raise their hand, then I raise my hand and I say, oh yeah, and I would of course be willing to go too, but you're going to have to pick the first 2 that raise their hand. So you get the credit for raising your hand, but it's sort of a delayed raising that is only based upon the fact that you're pretty confident that the 2 are already chosen. So now you want the credit of looking like you're raising your hand when you're actually not. What happens if no one raises their hand? What are you doing? I mean, and so what I like about the story isn't the fact that someone raised their hand, it's that they enthusiastically raised their hand. They desired the job. That's what I think is missing. We're missing the desire for this. We're trying to work on willingness right now. And desire is what we need. We need to recognize the privilege instead of just get to the point like, God, I'm willing, and it's a duty. I want the job. This is what I was built for. This is what I'm here on earth for. I know that I am called to Esther's role. This is what I've been waiting for. I've been praying for this my whole life, that I could stand up before King Ahasuerus. No guarantees that I'm going to live. That's what I've been looking for. Oh, praise God. Could you let me have this job? Let me have it, please. The excitement of the Aucan adventurers. You guys remember Jim Elliot and his band of merry men? As they discover the Aucas. By the way, the Aucas are like one of the most vicious tribes, if not the most vicious, legendary. And so no one in their right mind would ever want to pursue them, let alone find them, let alone go and try and reach them. You have to be somewhat cuckoo to even think these thoughts. These guys, when you study the story of these men, you either are thinking there's something loony about them or you're deeply inspired. They are desirous to reach these people. They have never heard of Jesus. It's almost like the darker they are in their souls, the more brightly the missionary desires to find them. Oh, that they would know Jesus. And these men are going to be so excited. You read their journals, you read their communications, you hear the story unfold, and you see even up until the very last moments that these guys are delighting in the privilege of reaching this people, even if it costs them their life. Okay, guys, we're missing something. That isn't the normal thinking patterns in the American church today. But I believe it must be. And I'm ready to push that and keep pressing on that to make sure it's in me and then make everyone uncomfortable until it's in us. If we want to be built for such an hour as this is what we need. The shout of Ignatius at the news. So Ignatius was a disciple of John the Apostle. And when he was told that he was going to be fed to the lions, he rejoiced. I don't know how, if I just said, hey guys, I have some news. All of us, they've locked the doors and they have some wild beasts down the road that they've kept hungry for the last week. And I guess they're going to feed us to them tomorrow. Let's pray. You know, what is your inner response to that? Ignatius is going to rejoice. My salvation has finally come, he says. He calls the lions his friends, for they're the ones that are going to bring him into the presence of his beloved Jesus. So they're friends. This is a different mentality that we're used to. And as a result, there have been many martyrs throughout the years, or I should say almost martyrs throughout the years, that they find out they're going to die and then they're rescued somehow, that are deeply disappointed in the fact that they were rescued. What? What is that? That's something that I want us to know intimately. I want us to risk getting familiar with it. The sprint of Germanicus in the arena. So could you imagine, there's Polycarp is a movie that was made, and you know, it didn't have a huge budget, but it conveyed something to me that deeply impacted me. So even though it may be a painting in the distance of the grand arena, it's sort of hard on a limited budget to create an old arena packed with thousands upon thousands of screaming people, right? You know, so I get that. Or to have wild beasts chewing on people. That's not the easiest thing. So everything is somewhat imagined, right? But Germanicus enters the arena and he's ready. And when you hear the roar of the beast and you see him smirk and then you see him run towards the beasts and then it fades, it's like, all right, you're speaking my language. That's what I want. I don't want to go in there and go, okay, God, this is your moment. You're going to have to undergird me because I'm about to be killed by wild beasts. Instead, it's like, finally, my time has come. Let's do this right. Come on, let's get going on this. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing. That's what David is going to do. He is going to sprint towards Goliath. Who in the right mind would sprint towards this creature, right? Who is likely at least double, maybe triple, maybe quadruple his size just in girth. Who is a champion, who is a warrior from his birth. And David wasn't even invited to the battle. He's a little boy with a sling, and he sprints towards him. That's the attitude that must be cultivated inside of us as the church. So the arrival at Cape Cod, November 11th, 1620. By the way, if you know your dates and times and you understand geography in America, you would not want to arrive at Cape Cod in November. Okay, this was not the plan. There was all sorts of delays, all sorts of difficulties. They'd already had to eat most of their food because they had to go out, come back, because of leaks, come out, come back. The Speedwell was considered unseaworthy. Now they're all packed into the Mayflower. They're going to come across. Everything is delayed. Now they're going to arrive in November. Okay, so it's getting cold out there. Because of the storms, they are unable to get down to the Jamestown colony where there's already pre-built buildings. So they're going to land in a place of a savage wilderness with no hospitality set up to take them in. They have been in the most miserable 7 weeks of travel any human could ever go through, in the bottom of this boat in the midst of a tempest. The whole time, they're sick, they're already weak. Many of them have already died on the Mayflower, and now they arrive in no man's land. I mean, this is a difficult situation, but I tell you what, this is a good moment to test those that are in this crew. They've already been tested, right? But here you go. Now, who wants to get off the boat and go to the land and see what you can find? Oh, I want that job, because the legends, you have to recognize what these guys know. They know that not only does disease usually kill you when you get over, but the cold, and it's an unfamiliar cold to them. This is a lot colder than what they're used to. And Indians. I mean, the stories are legendary, and they just want to kill you. And, I mean, they're built to kill. As far as everyone's mindset, this is a savage wilderness, which it is. I'm not going to argue that. So the exploration party of 10, December 6, 1620, they had to build a little boat, and they're going to go. And I don't know which 10 want to sign up for this, but these are like icy waters. These guys are glazed over with ice, even when they're arriving at their campsite that night. And so this is like, who wants this job? What I'm exercising inside of myself is, because I'm not one of those guys that really wants to be on a boat, right? In the icy wind, and camp out on everything about this is opposite of the way I was raised. Okay, camping is not something I really delight in. Hunting, not something I really. I'm like the classic gentleman from Jamestown. As I study this, like, oh no, I was raised as a gentleman from Jamestown, and that's not good if you study Jamestown. Okay, this isn't a good sign. And so there's so many tensions in my soul as I go through this. Would I be willing to say, I'll go, and to actually get in that little boat and to go into the unknown? And they're exploring. They're looking for some place to settle. And I mean, this